I am Brian Maze. Follow along on our adventures chasing all kinds of game in the heartland of America. Our passions run from the North Woods rivers all the way out to the wild and wide open prairies. We are untamed, and wild is all we chase. This is the Amazing Outdoors Podcast.
Oh, that's a ski, dude. That's a moss ski.
There's one on the tree right there.
Oh, there's another one. That's a good way to start the morning. I'm gonna drink some of my beer quick.
There's a woodcock. What is going on, folks? Brian Maze back for another episode of the Amazing Outdoors Podcast. Before I get rolling here, I have to mention HW Launchers. I've got a lot of spring training done with the pup, and they have a new design coming out. So if you're in the market for a bird launching system, head on over to HW Launchers. Check them out. Get a pair. Tell Jeremiah you heard about his pigeon launchers and bird launchers here on the Amazing Outdoors Podcast. All right, another short and sweet intro. Today's guest, Keenan Wind of Windy Fishing Guide Service. We talk about Mille Lacs. We talk about his approach to kind of dissecting a fishery, and just a general overall little primer here. Spring fishing is upon us. Open waters here. And the walleye opener, smallmouth opener in Minnesota, muskie opener's not too terribly far away. So I thought I'd get Keenan on the podcast, and I hope you all enjoy it. Here is Keenan Wind with Windy Fishing Guide Service. If you're looking to book a trip with Keenan, head on down to the show notes and click the link for Windy Fishing Guide Service. Here we go. Wind with Windy Fishing Guide Service. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. Thanks for kind of working with me on the last little technical difficulty session.
Hey, that goes two ways, man. That goes two ways.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. It's tough to do a podcast from currently we're 5 hours away, and I think even when I'm home, we're probably all of 2. So I own Windy Fishing Guide Service. I was the grandson of an avid fisherman and guide. I guess I should say am the grandson of an avid fisherman and guide. My childhood was spent on the water. 90% of those days in my early childhood were on Mille Lacs. Spent a lot of time with Grandpa pitching slip bobbers and lindy rigging and pulling bouncers. But kind of the end of the day, my reward would be pulling up to a rock pile and catching a smallie or two. And, this was well before Mille Lacs was as well known as it is in the bass world, but, has always been a legendary walleye lake. So I started Windy Fishing Guide Service at age 19 to kind of share my passion, as well as spending time on the water. My whole life, I've never been able to get enough of the water. So it's one of those things where it just seemed to make sense. And so I've been super fortunate over the last 5 years. I'm going on my 5th season. Super fortunate to spend, over 100 days on the water with clients, serving, anywhere from 60 to 100 clients a year. I just had a blast. It's been an amazing time. I should say that I've been guiding for more than just since I founded my business. I had pretty early beginnings, taking people out on their own boats or, taking trips out of my boat, trips for tips type of deal. So lots of experience there. Spent a ton of time on Mille Lacs. I love Mille Lacs tons. It is one of the coolest.
For some of the listeners who may not be, Minnesota or Wisconsin based, or maybe even Iowa or North Dakota, where is Mille Lacs? And just lay a few things for the listeners that might not know where Mille Lacs Lake is, or what
Mille
exactly
Lacs.
we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. We're about an hour and a half north of the Twin Cities metro area. So kind of central Minnesota, kind of right in the middle of the state.
Kind of well known for a few things.
Yeah. So Mille Lacs has kind of always been a legendary walleye lake. Kind of back to the days of early settlement in the area. Mille Lacs has always been kind of a tourist attraction. My great grandparents owned a resort on Mille Lacs in kind of that heyday of tourism, and it's been so legendary. Walleye Lake is kind of the historical legend. In more recent years, the focus has been smallmouth bass, and it is such a phenomenal smallmouth bass fishery. I fish a lot of other bodies of water throughout the Midwest, and have fished, will fish, do fish, and there is nothing quite like Mille Lacs. I've seen a number of fish north of pushing 7, lots of fish north of 6. We get a pretty significant number of fish between above 5, and then also between 4 and 5 every year. It's, I can't really guarantee any success rates, but it's pretty rare that we have a guide trip where we don't put at least 1 4-pounder in the boat. So, and there aren't really a lot of bodies of water that I've ever fished that is, anything that can be said. Muskies, Mille Lacs has them, not a lot of them, but it has them, and they're big. So the Mille Lacs muskie population is very unique in the sense that it's incredibly low density, but the caliber of fish that are existing in Mille Lacs is so incredible that it's pretty astonishing. I've seen the biggest fish come out of there. We currently hold Mille Lacs currently holds a state record, and a number of other records as well. So Mille Lacs is 132,500 acres. One of the cool things about Mille Lacs is that it has an incredible structure density. So it's kind of characterized by a couple different things. The south end is primarily rocks and gravel. The northeast corner is sand, and then the northwest corner is kind of attributed to be mud and gravel, but kind of the center of the lake has a bunch of mud flats. When Mille Lacs was carved out, it's a glacial lake, I should mention that. When Mille Lacs was carved out by glaciers, there were peat deposits which form our mud flats. And so the mud flats top out at 23, 24 feet. Off the edges will be anywhere from 30 to 35, kind of depends. And it really sets up to be a phenomenal walleye fishery with a plethora of different ways to target fish at any given point in time in the season. I spend a lot of time throwing bobbers for walleyes. I'll do some lindy rigging, bottom mounting, trolling cranks. I mean, Mille Lacs is kind of a walleye fisherman's paradise in terms of different structures you can fish and different ways you can target them. Most of my business is smallmouth fishing, so we're doing a lot of finesse stuff, kind of Ned rigs, drop shots, small swim baits, things of that nature. And one of the most beautiful things about Mille Lacs is that out of any boat ramp, you have to drive no more than half a mile before you're on phenomenal structure. There is such an incredible density of structure out there that it is incredible. I use all but 2 or 3 boat ramps, and the only reason I don't use those boat ramps is because they're too shallow and just not good boat ramps.
That's a lot of boat ramps, man. I've been to Mille Lacs a number of times, given my location, and always it was all for a while there. It was open ice or for early ice destination for me, like Thanksgiving weekend, ice picking it out, and it was always pretty much a guarantee that somebody in the group was going to ice a good, like, big hog walleye. And we catch a few here or there. It's been a tough angling opportunity as of late for walleyes. There's been actually, I think that recently is it 1 fish now that you can actually keep during the season out there? Or is it closed?
Actually, we're actually closed now, and so that's one of the things I would love to address. I'm glad you brought this up. It hasn't been tough angling. It's been some of the best angling I've seen in my 24 years of existence.
Well, let me rephrase that. I don't mean as like opportunity to catch fish. I mean an opportunity to harvest fish.
Yeah. Yep. So
and that's what drives tourism, and that's why guys go fish. Especially walleye. There's some diehards out there, but at the end of the day, everybody likes to take a couple of fillets home.
Yeah. And I can't really empathize with this. I'm allergic to fish.
Yeah, I know.
I've never eaten a fish. So, I can try and empathize with it, but I don't know what walleye tastes like. So I don't really know, but yeah, I mean, it's the harvest thing. It's pretty unfortunate. I think that I think that the DNR has, I'm not going to critique anybody too harshly, but I think that it's an inaccurate estimate in terms of biomass and the quantity of fish that were up there. And I don't really care to get into the specificities of why I think that is an inaccurate assessment.
But you don't have to. You can still hold an opinion based on your day-to-day experience out on the water.
But man, our fish, they seem healthy. I've kind of seen the ebbs and flows of Mille Lacs over the last 10 years and 12 years, 14 years. I remember being a kid and I think we had a 4-fish limit regardless. And, it was nothing to go out there and put 4 slaughters in the box regardless. And I would say the fishing is just as good now as it was then, if not better. And through that time, we've seen fish get really skinny and we've only caught big fish for a little while. Okay, then we're only catching little fish. And, walleyes are coughing up smaller walleyes, So I've experienced this kind of ebb and flow in population. And, man, our fish are healthy right now. People are still out there catching some of the nicest perch that I've seen come out of Mille Lacs in the last 10 years plus. And overall, the ecosystem seems incredibly healthy. And since we're on the topic, I'll just briefly mention I have a bachelor's in biology from the University of Morris. I'm currently working on a master's in public health through the University of Minnesota. So the reason that I mentioned the bio degree is because I have a bit of background in ecology, freshwater ecology, biology, things of that nature. So a lot of the time when I'm describing things from a critical lens, it is kind of from the lens of my education. So just to kind of talk about, get into Mille Lacs a little bit. What we have seen historically is kind of an ebb and flow in the population, which is supernatural, right? Naturally, there are going to be cycles, whether it's by spawning year or by, 1 year of poor spawning efficacy could lead to, a 4-year class in that situation. And we've seen that historically. I think that it may have been more accentuated. But to kind of talk broadly about Mille Lacs ecology, there are a number of changing factors at any given point in time. So I think that, we were I think zebra mussels were introduced in the early 2000s or 1999. I think they were first found in Mille Lacs. So we're certainly past the peak. We're 20 years in. I think zebra mussel biomass peaked in I don't know. I don't know the exact date, but early 2010s, I believe, 2010, 2012, 2014, somewhere in there. And so what we see here is kind of a massive exponential growth in population from point of introduction to sort of the peak of the population, and then we kind of see a steady decline, kind of a slow decline as the population works to normalize at a carrying capacity. From that, we have seen there are a couple of different things that we think are as a result of zebra mussel introduction. So first of all, water clarity is the most well noted, right? And that has a number of things. There are a handful of studies on the Great Lakes with zebra mussel introduction. Generally, it changes that water clarity, which increases predation. That's been seen in other bodies of water. And then you also see a planktonic biomass decrease. So when I say planktonic biomass, it just means little invertebrates that are floating in the water that don't really move themselves or move by the current is kind of the definition of planktonic. And then biomass is just kind of a broad term for the number of them in there. So you generally see this planktonic biomass decrease with the introduction of zebra mussels. And they kind of take things from, they're filter feeders, so they take things from the water column and deposit them on the water substrate interface, so on the bottom, basically. And that can have an implication for other fish species that are involved in kind of the food cascade that is an ecosystem. And one of the things that I would attribute to this and is the decrease in the abundance of tulaby in Mille Lacs. According to the DNR, there are pretty drastic decreases in tulaby on Mille Lacs. It's difficult to kind of quantify that. Like, my evidence is anecdotal and driving over a reef, as the tulaby are staging to spawn in the fall, driving over a reef, you'd think the lake was plumb full of tulaby, but according to the DNR, that isn't the case. So there are a number of factors impacting the walleye fishing. I think the walleye population is phenomenal on the Lacs. There was a time when fish seemed like they were starving, and it seemed like you could go out there and catch them regardless, whenever, however, with whatever, right?
Sure.
And we're not there. We're catching a pretty good balance in population of fish. We catch a lot of, kind of small 6-8 inch walleyes, kind of thing that just pokes you a bunch and is kind of a pain in the butt to get off the hook. But then we're also catching a lot of 14, 17, 18. So our slots for the last couple of years has been one between 21 and 23. Last year, for a short time, it was opened up for one fish for harvest between 20 and 23. And, not all the time did we catch slaughters, but a lot of the time we did work through slaughters on a 4, 6, or 8 hour guide trip. But we caught a lot of other size fish as well. It's not like, the population is poor, in my opinion. I think that the fish seem healthy. They seem well fed, and overall the population seems balanced.
Yeah, I don't spend nearly the amount of time, but I've always been a little bit skeptical on what is said publicly about the DNR or about Mille Lacs versus my experience on Mille Lacs. However, I've had ice fishing trips up there where, fish were tough to come by, but I think that's just fishing, dude. Like, some weekends aren't great. And when you're limited on where you can travel, and what kind of ground you can cover from, how the ice fishing thing lays out up there, sometimes if you're not on sleds, there's only so much you can do. So, I've heard things from other people as well that say, the fishery's fine. Now, there are outside elements too that, obviously in the public, like, you got people that are like, well, the Indians harvest, all these fish. And then, so the tribe definitely plays a role in, I think, how the DNR wants to respond publicly to things as well. There's politics behind it all up there. And, it's just a little bit more than I think most people realize when you start looking at a huge resource like Mille Lacs is in the state of Minnesota. There's a lot to what the DNR is willing to say. It's so close to the city metro. Like, there's just so much politically that it has to go into a public statement, unfortunately, about Mille Lacs, that I think, the whole harvest thing has really put a hurt on a lot of those resort communities up there. Obviously, less people go when they can't harvest fish. And then you have a winter like this one where ice was shoddy the whole winter. I sure hope people go up and enjoy Mille Lacs this year. And that's why I wanted to get you on too, because, obviously it's known for a few things. Like I said, muskie's a good opportunity at a giant, not a great opportunity, but a good opportunity at a giant fish. And you do a little bit of that. Plus you start bringing 7-pounders out there as a drop, like I know you catch some of them every season. So, it's funny to, a smallmouth angler when they start dropping pounds rather than inches for the fish they catch, size they catch.
Yeah, for sure.
So I know there was, you kind of covered a lot there with the, Mille Lacs underlying situations with a few things. You kind of take what I always enjoyed talking to you too, Keenan, is you kind of take a very, system science approach based to like understanding the why of what you see out there on the water. And I know we wanted to kind of connect today too, to kind of lay out just a little bit of, the research that you kind of feel could maximize anglers' opportunity out on the lake. So where do you want to head from here? You should plug your guide service a little bit more, but then decide which one you want to bite off first, and we'll kind of leave a few things for the end of the show.
Yeah. So, I just have a note here. Like, my favorite part about guiding, is always taking out like kiddos and monumental experiences, kind of first fish, biggest fish, first muskie kind of thing. One of my clients brings his 8-year-old son out fishing, and we got him a big bass, and then early season we got him a bigger bass in September, and then we got him his first muskie at 8 years old in October as well. So I've been super fortunate to establish such close friendships with a lot of my clients. At this point, I'm pursuing higher education, and at this point I don't really see any end in sight to guiding. I might have to get a big boy job at some point in time, but I don't really see ever stopping guiding at this point, because I've established such phenomenal relationships and friendships with my clients over the years. I've got people that I've been taking out for 5-6 years now, and watching kids grow up, and kind of having those connections and those relationships. Another thing that I wanted to mention, I also guide silver salmon in Alaska for Alaskan Wilderness Outfitters at the Sayou River Lodge. It's a fly-in remote trip in coastal Alaska. I do all my own fly tying for up there. So between now and when I leave for Alaska, I'm leaving this year on August 19th, I believe. I'll have a million flies to tie between now and then, but we're wade fishing on the fly up there. There's a lot of conventional fishermen as well up there, but it's a premier fly fishing location. If you want to talk about like beginner fly fishing, like you have casting down, but you haven't fought a lot of fish or something, put your fly in front of an angry silver in Alaska, and it's such a riot. Like, we're having beginner fly fishermen that are easily catching 30, 40, 50 fish a day. Some of the more experienced guys are maybe touching 100, or maybe not catching them, but you're hooking up, so many times it's ridiculous. So yeah, Alaska is something cool that I've been fortunate to do as well. Talking a little bit about my guide service as well. This year, one of the big expansions is I'm expanding to offer river trips. So I've owned a jet boat for a number of years, a little John boat powered with an outboard jet. But I decided that jet was not big enough to handle clients very well. So I purchased a much larger jet. And this is actually how Brian and I met, in lieu of boats and looking at boats. Brian had a drift that I was thinking about, but I was kind of hemming and hawing about drift versus jet, and ultimately chose the jet boat life. And I think that was a pretty good decision. As cool as I think it would be to have a drift boat, I'm sure I'll own one at some point. The jet just seems to make a lot more sense for what I'm doing, and just for ease of use. But,
yeah, and offering that experience for clients, kind of where you are, you just can't beat a jet.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you, man. Like, I didn't even want to sell you my boat.
Yeah, fair enough. So, in order to offer guided river trips with a boat that's being powered by anything, I needed to get a operator of uninspected passenger vehicle 6-pack captain's license, which I have passed the exam. I've done all the prereqs. My application has been submitted, and I'm waiting for the Coast Guard's final approval of my captain's license, and then they'll send me my captain's license, which will be very exciting. As soon as that happens, I will be starting to take some clients out on the river. As of right now, that should be early June, which I'm perfectly okay with, because the first couple of weeks I need to be on Mille Lacs anyways. That's when we have a pretty high chance of catching some of the biggest fish of the season is that early season and then late season as well. So I'm very excited to get out on Mille Lacs and spend the first couple of weeks, and then probably tail end of June, early July, I'll transition to doing more river guiding, provided we have the water. So far recently we've been getting some good rain, and seems to be the end of our drought for our couple year drought, it seems like.
Don't jinx yourself.
Yeah, true. Fair enough. But yeah,
I thought that last year.
Yeah, true.
Especially after the spring we had last year, and this year it has not been like that, but it's been consistent enough that, I hope it's over, man. I really do. That low water of the last couple of years is really tough.
I'm tired of the crunchy grass everywhere you go. I'm excited to have, part of it on the Mille Lacs is some of our boat ramps that are normally pretty good are getting pretty poor towards the tail end of the season. So, it makes the bad boat ramps even worse, and the good boat ramps even worse as well. So, something to be hopeful for anyways this season. But I'm excited about this expansion. It's going to be pretty cool. Kind of breaking up. Like, I have a lot of clients that have been fishing with me for a number of years now, and I don't think you'll ever get me off of Mille Lacs entirely, or even for a majority of the time. But I think that every now and again, kind of breaking things up and being able to go and play around on the fly a little bit easier, on Mille Lacs, you got to make a really long cast to fish a reef the same way that you do with an Ed rig or a swim bait or something. So on the river, when you're fishing banks or you're fishing a wing dam or an eddy or whatever, right? You might not need to make that whole, might not need to cast an entire line. And I think that's one of the important parts, as well as kind of expanding to offer fly fishing more efficiently. I really enjoy guiding fly fishing in Alaska, so I figured I might as well do some fly guiding in Minnesota as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the day that you call me and say you had a cancellation and you're still going fishing. Can you make it?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. I'm excited. I was thinking we could do a podcast from the boat, like get some little lapel mics, and
I have some,
and kind of record some. Record a podcast.
I've got the whole setup.
Perfect. We'll have to make that happen. We'll go on a float. We'll dump the jet in.
That'd be rad. I've not had a lot of experience on the river on a jet, so I would really love to. There's oftentimes been musky encounters that if you had a jet to instead of rowing back up and kind of floating it'd just be so much nicer just to hey, let's go give another freaking pass at that one. You know, he was hungry. I didn't get the right angle. Like, let's go get another pass at that one. There's some spots on the river where it's just not even possible to do really effectively out of a drift boat because of current and where eddies might lie. And, you know, you might be sitting right off the edge of a really fast moving current. And with that jet, oh my gosh, my shoulders would love you.
Yeah, I'm excited. This jet is such an upgrade over my last one. I loved my last boat. It was everything that I'm still kind of sad about getting rid of it. My new boat is 10 times the boat, but the last one was kind of, you know, how I cut my teeth with jet boating, and it was a 1648 Mod V. It was a Monarch, super thin hull, but it was super lightweight. And I had it powered with a 4028 Yamaha 2-stroke outboard jet, short shaft. Transom was built up a couple inches, but it ran very skinny. But the cool thing about that boat is that it ran very skinny, very slowly. There was very little weight, so it almost acted like a drift boat in the sense that it kind of just, you know, almost seemed to, it just displaced very little water because it was so lightweight. This big one is 10 times the boat as well. It displaces a similar amount of water, but it's much heavier, much thicker hull. It's welded versus riveted, so it's much more heavy duty. It's powered with my new jet is powered with a 9065 Yamaha 2-stroke jet. The new boat it's a 1756, so a lot more width, another foot of length, and it feels like 10 times the space as the other one had. And, you know, the thing that's, this boat in its current configuration is basically the configuration of the first jet boat that I ever got in. And I was like, all right, I need to have one of these for sure. That 9065 pushes my boat at 32, 33 miles an hour. You know, going down, you're looking at 35 or so. And, yeah, I'm very excited to spend more time in it. I've only had it on the water a couple times, just kind of running it around and testing it out. But it seems like everything that I could have wanted and more out of a second guide rig, anyways.
I think I have a spot that you'll have to come over and fish with me one of these days too. So
perfect. You let me know. You let me know. Have fished, will travel. I'm there.
I think early June when you get off your post spawn smallie bite out of there on Mille Lacs, and that muskie season starts to open. I think we should definitely hit it.
Oh, dude, I'm so excited for river muskies. And really, it's just about utilizing more of the resources that Minnesota has. You know, part of why, you know, I wanted to talk, part of some of my more broad thoughts about fishing is, you know, you kind of mentioned my scientific or kind of systems approach to fishing. And part of it is that you can do your homework at home to figure out, you know, how to utilize those resources more efficiently. So there, you know, sometimes it's kind of a bear to find some of the data and some of the, you know, things like, I know you have, but I have as well. And you're reading a forum post on, you know, some Fishing Minnesota forum from 2001 at 1:30 in the morning because you're like, man, you know, couldn't sleep, and you thought about this lake that you remember talking to some old timer about, that, you know, whatever it is, right? Or, you know, seeing a lake as you drive by or whatever, and kind of trying to find information and data on
I mean,
that.
these days it's usually me. I'm scrolling on aerial photos and overlays and other maps for where my next grouse haunt is. But at one point in time, like, I was just like you with fishing. I still am, but most of the time I find myself looking for grouse spots nowadays.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I'm normally trying to find some pheasants as well, but in terms of fishing, you know, it's like you say, you know, kind of looking at those stretches of river and just kind of utilizing more resources. Like there are there are plenty of lakes out there, and like Minnesota has the Minnesota DNR runs the Lakefinder app, which is such a phenomenal resource. Like you can look at just a number of different things, and that was kind of going back to the systems approach thing. One of the things I wanted to talk about is just kind of how to more broadly characterize what you're going to see in some of these lakes. And some of these things can be learned without any formal education. Like you and I have talked about my 6-horse motor and my 14-foot little Lund days, or it was an Alumacraft. And I'm just cruising around looking at things, physically looking at structure on calm days in clear water, or driving around and graphing things. Like I found rock piles on the Mille Lacs that aren't on any map that I've ever seen, and really putting the time in. Like I spend a lot of time burning fuel on Mille Lacs. My buddy Ryan, when I was younger, my buddy Ryan would put our first 50-mile day on Mille Lacs on, and I just remember thinking like, wow, like I didn't even think you could drive that far in a day. Well, since then I've started putting on a pretty ridiculous amount of miles. Thankfully, I have a pretty fuel efficient outboard, so super fortunate in that sense. But I never really stopped researching, even when I'm on the water on the Lacs. I spend a lot of time out there just scanning structures, areas between structures that I've never fished, or I don't know, just like it's pretty impossible to cover the amount of water out there that you need to know, every rock, every shelf, every, gravel to mud transition, sand to gravel, you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely, man. Like, I don't know. You're talking to a guy who, sorry, the dog decided she was going to come down to the podcast studio, but I literally got into my particular river fishing with a drift boat and trying to take fly anglers because I didn't have to have any electronics. I didn't have to burn a bunch of fuel buzzing around on reefs trying to find that spot. And I could understand the river dynamics a lot better. And some of that was due to just understanding rivers, but also understanding, reading maps and trying to find out where fish were in the river prior to even going out. And it's easier, I would say, on a river for, somebody who has fished rivers for years to go, okay, here, there's obviously off the satellite view, there's fast moving current and there appears to be a deep hole here. Like I'm going to target muskies there. And it's easier to pick that up, I guess I could say, off of just satellite imagery than it is on a lake. So there's a certain degree I think people, they get out there, they have kind of a half-ass plan, and then all of a sudden plan C's out the window and we're trying to find something because we're up here for the day. And that's why, again, I wanted to kind of chat with you too about this little bit more systems approach, some of the research you do, so that, the guy that I'm talking about, or myself who I've been there, kind of has a better way to develop even a plan on the fly because they know a little bit more about the lake or where they might find fish based on these conditions.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of your mention of river fishing and like how fish stage in the river, my girlfriend and I went to a state park earlier this week over here in North Dakota, and the Turtle River State Park. But there are trout stocked in this stream. But the reason that I wanted to mention it is because I was just looking at the stream and just kind of standing at the banks of the stream. My dog's being a terror, smelling animals and that, and she's always wanted to hunt when we're in the woods. So, trying to walk her on a leash in a state park is kind of difficult. But anyways,
you're a better man than I. I won't even try to attempt that some days.
So what I was thinking as I was looking at this river, knowing that our conversation was coming up, it was pretty astonishing to look at, knowing what I know now about rivers, As a kid, we have a stream that runs through our property. I would go down there and, mess with the minnows and catch creek chubs on a little worm and a tiny little hook or whatever. Or the Rum River runs right through our property as well, or kind of adjacent to our property. One of the things I thought was interesting is I was looking at these different log jams and these different eddies and these different, this small stream. It's, max depth is probably 4 or 5 feet, and I would say the majority of it's less than 20 feet in width. So it's pretty small stream. But it was pretty crazy to see how fish were staging in eddies, and how bait was staging in eddies and log jams, things of that nature. And I think that, this kind of goes to our, kind of figuring things out type of thing. Like, it might just look like little minnows sitting in an eddy or a back current, right? Or a back eddy. That's important as well. It might look like, just minnows hanging out, right? But I think there's a lot to be learned about just going out and looking at a stream this time of the year when you have, your little minnows and in your eddies and in your current seams and things of that nature, and seeing how bait fish are relating to those, but also maybe just how fish are relating to those. And so I think that, with this systems approach to fishing is kind of applying what you see and what kind of on the fly. So with this whole, Brian and I have kind of mentioned the systems approach to fishing, and I haven't really explained like what it is. And
yeah, lay it out like the 15-second, 30-second elevator pitch to like the building blocks of it, at least.
I would say that, this kind of systems approach utilizes like basic foundations of freshwater ecology, and, to describe fish, understand fish, as well as their behavior. So with this, like, I'm always going to encourage research. So whether it's on Lakefinder, whether it's on satellite imagery, like, man, I can't tell you the amount of time that I've spent on Google Maps just looking for different bodies of water or different boat ramps, or, oh, where does this stream connect? How does this stream connect to this river? Things of that nature. And just utilizing, the wealth of knowledge that we have, whether it's Lakefinder, Google Maps. We have a ton of technology, and I think that you like when I say things like this, but a lot of guys will spend 20 grand on a boat, but a lot of guys won't pick up a book. It's easy to, want to look cool and have a fancy, sparkly boat, but it doesn't necessarily help you catch fish. And I think that's what kind of differentiates me a little bit, is that, I haven't joined the sparkly boat industry yet. However, I've read a lot of books. So, there's a lot of value in education is what I'm trying to say, and a lot of value in kind of trying to learn things more so than just buying your way into things.
Or I heard from the bait shop guy that the walleyes were over here yesterday. I think we've all done that, but at the end of the day, what you're talking about is understanding why the fish were where they were yesterday and getting a good educated guess on where they're going to be today.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of trying to use this sort of internal algorithm. I mean, it's easy to spend I spend hundreds of hours a year on the water. Well, it's easy for me to determine, a sort of mental algorithm, or like when you go on the river, you've got you look at the wind, you look at the flow, you look at, the time of the year, the bug hatch, whatever it is, and you're developing your kind of internal algorithm. You kind of use this algorithm that your experience has developed to, determine how, what your game plan for the day is. Well, what I'm trying to kind of say with this whole systems approach deal is there are a number of things that you can utilize to develop your algorithm off the water before you even get to the lake. And so, I'm not saying this to complicate how you perceive fishing. A lot of the time I'm going out there and I'm just looking to have a good day. Like, I'm just going to go and spend a day on the water. But, things with guiding, as you were aware, Brian, with guiding, there's a little bit more pressure. We kind of gotta perform. So all this to be said, like, I don't want everybody to like get stressed out about like, oh man, I got to learn freshwater ecology to catch a bass. No, that's definitely not it. But there are certain things like basic population dynamics, ebbs and flows, carrying capacity, predator and prey cycles that if you understand, and I'll kind of jump into this stuff as quickly as we can, that a basic understanding of these things will help you kind of develop a game plan, I guess.
I completely agree. And I think what we're trying to convey is that and I don't mean to sit on a pedestal and say this, I'm very humble that I have the opportunity to guide. I'm trying to kind of share some of the things you learn over the water, on the water or out in the woods. They become second nature. Like, I'm not going out hunting next Saturday and making a game plan because I'm got to plan that. I know I'm guiding, but because of all the time I spend out there, I can lick my finger and go, hey, we need to hunt on this side. Where somebody who doesn't spend that much time doesn't have kind of this algorithm in our head built up so it makes decisions super, super quick. There's a lot of things that I go into and have analyzed in the first 5 minutes of the situation. And then we'll go out and test something out. And if I didn't like what I see in the guiding, if I'm guiding hunters, I'll flip the switch and try the other side of the thought that I might think where the birds are going to be. And a lot of times, with fishing too, you're trying multiple tactics. If, things aren't, there's things that you and I can make decisions on the water a lot quicker. And we're out there that's based on experience. What we want people to know is where that kind of foundation comes from so they can make more planned decisions when they go out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all, well, yeah, none of this.
And I don't know how to explain it without something like a dick. But somebody that's got a weekend to fish has less time to base their decisions on, where you and I, might be out there 3 days, 4 days that week already. We have kind of an idea of what's going on exactly on the fishery at that moment or out in the woods. So to give that other guy an advantage in this, he has to start thinking about how we're developing kind of that algorithm or, that quick decision-making process, how to create good opportunities for people. We're using these kind of gut feels at this point, and this is kind of how we've derived that. And you more over than me. I give you a lot of credit. I'm just like, yeah, I kind of do that, Yeah. But I never knew what the biology or the ecology or the reasoning behind that, and that's why I always enjoy talking to you, Keenan, because I learned something.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important. Like even I mentioned my education. Like I don't mean to like throw that in as like, oh, I've got an education in fisheries biology. Like, that's not my intent. My intent is just like, hey, I've got some background. I know some stuff. Maybe use it or don't. But what I'm trying to present and the kind of the ways that I'm trying to suggest things is an expansion of perspective, just in the sense that you can look at the entire system of the fish more so than just like, I'm not going to go out and catch a bass today. Or I'm going to go out and catch a bass today, and then you're going to kind of extrapolate, okay, well, where are we in relation to spawn? Are we, say our goal is smallmouth, and they start pulling up on beds at, let's say 58 degrees or something. I don't know, whatever the number is for, some people say 50, some people say 54, whatever it is. Some people say 62, whatever, but you're looking at that looking at the fish in relation to the rest of the system. So where are we in terms of spawn? What is the forage? So what is the fish feeding on? If it's if there's a big minnow hatch going on, or if this time of the year fish are primarily feeding on minnows, or are they primarily feeding on crawfish? Are they, what's our forage base look like? Like in terms of muskies, like in my experience, muskies exist and behave a lot differently in bodies of water that have Cisco versus bodies of water that do not have Cisco. So, I've spent a ton of time on the last fishing muskies, but also some bigger bodies of water in the state of Minnesota. And it's important, in my experience, it's important to know what size of fish those fish are feeding on. Like on Mille Lacs, you can throw a pounder and, you're going to get bit, or you have just as good a chances of getting bit as throwing anything else. Well, on a body of water that, the primary forage is bluegill or suckers or, creek chubs or whatever it is, right? Maybe that pounder looks a little bit odd in a lake where the primary forage base is, panfish, yellow perch, crappie, bluegills, whatever. So, kind of looking at, so we have, where are we in relation to spawn, time of the year type thing. Then also forage. Also, I think one of the things that you and I have talked about pretty in depth in our own conversations, and I think it's important to note for anybody listening, I don't think that Brian and I have ever called each other and caught up for less than an hour and a half, 2 hours. Like, it's kind of that thing where, like, oh man, I'm driving from Grand Forks back home to Onamia, Minnesota, and I'll call Brian and see what he's doing, and that's probably going to be half of my drive, and then we're both just stressed out with the amount of stuff that we have to do that we're procrastinating with our phone call. But one of the things that you and I have talked about pretty extensively is how water oxygenation works. So
yeah, I learned a lot from those conversations, my friend. I mean, at least like technical terms and the way that I saw things,
yeah.
I kind of knew how to piece them together and a little bit differently now.
Yeah, for sure. So it's just important to note that cold water holds more dissolved oxygen than warm water. And there's kind of a couple things that are just important things to note in this whole systems approach to fishing. I'm not going to bore everybody with, the crazy details of how these things occur and how oxygen is consumed during decomposition, but just basically saying that bacteria utilize oxygen in the decomposition process. Winter kill is a depletion of dissolved oxygen, so there's not enough oxygen for fish. That's why you see them coming up to the surface in holes and trying to find any oxygen. Hypoxia, that's just a term that refers to an area where oxygen isn't available in sufficient levels. So the reason that I bring up this whole oxygenation thing also ties into water stratification. Well, what the hell is water stratification? Water stratification is just the natural. So water also fluctuates in density. So water will be most dense at 4 degrees Celsius. And this is the whole basis of turnover, right? The turnover happens at, 39.2 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever it is. Well, that basically equates to when the water that is the most dense at the top becomes more dense than the other, and it kind of makes this turnover event, and that is because of water stratification. So thermocline is a steep temperature gradient in a body of water. Normally it's going to be a lake. It generally doesn't happen in shallow water lakes. It has to happen in deeper water lakes. And they're I'm just going to touch briefly on the 3 different layers. So you have your epilimnion, your top layer, where there is the most oxygen with constant replenishment from the atmosphere. You have your metalimnion, which is kind of below that epilimnion, has oxygen at the beginning of the summer, but it's going to be used up until it's gone. Well, then the hypolimnion has little to no oxygen. That's the very, very bottom. So this is like fish that can survive with very little oxygen are going to survive there, or it could be a total dead zone. And the reason I mention this is, if you're fishing a body of water and, you're marking your fish in the top 15 feet or top 25 feet or whatever, well, that's probably because below there, say you're fishing 45 feet of water and you're not marking anything at the very bottom. Or you're driving over a school of Cisco and you see them consistently, or you're consistently marking a school of Tullaby at, 25 feet down or whatever it is. that's probably because there's a lack of oxygen below where they are, so they can't survive there. So the point of saying this is, don't fish where there isn't oxygen, and just kind of understanding some of that basic oxygenation things might save some time in terms of, you don't want to waste time fishing unoxygenated areas. One of the other things that I think is important in terms of utilizing, data resources is the ability to look at an ecosystem and, think about what sort of population will be there, or at least make the population make sense a little bit more. Well, first of all, Brian, do you have any questions, or should I elaborate on any of the water oxygenation or stratification stuff?
I don't know that you need to add on to it, but I think what maybe you could touch on for a second is relate that to Mille Lacs and wind in the summer, is in a thermocline. Can you just place a real world example on that? Briefly?
Yeah, for sure. So Mille Lacs isn't as deep as some lakes that see
sure.
crazy water stratification.
Yeah, but it sees some.
Yeah, it's just not as for the most part.
Use a different lake that might be a better example.
Superior could be a good example.
Sure.
Some of the deeper shield lakes, another good example would be the mine lakes, the mines up in central Minnesota. Any really deep lake, I guess, would be a good, Mille Lacs' maximum depth is 42 or 44 feet, kind of depending on water level fluctuation. But I'm kind of talking about, that where there's enough water that there is enough depth that there is a distinct stratification. I guess, yeah, let's just say arbitrarily a deep water system. And what you're going to see is there might be some activity on the very bottom, but you're going to see this sort of just a constant state of decomposition. There's not really anything that goes on there. And in that middle layer underneath the thermocline, there will be such little oxygen that fish don't exist there. So you see this a lot in shield lakes, where lake trout exist, or things of that nature. And that's why I was going to talk briefly about water or lake classification, biological classification.
Sure.
But the thermocline is I think about it in
I think about it in salmon fishing. So you get a long west wind out on Lake Michigan, and it pulls in a bunch of cold water, and kind of there's a thermocline, in some of these bays where degree of temperature might have dropped 5 degrees because it's pulling deeper, colder water in, because it's pushing all the water eastward with a west wind offshore. So that's kind of where I think about some of this stuff is, why are, the salmon coming in? Well, because the water that they like to be in, is somewhat temperature related to oxygen at that point. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a great comparison.
Yeah.
I don't really think about it as much in terms of wind as just existing normally, I guess, is kind of my mention of it. So
there's certain, events that happen that at least I'm used to fishing. And I know when, you get a long wind event on kind of that Lake Michigan shoreline in Wisconsin, and it blows out of the west, it pulls in cooler water.
Yeah, for sure. I think that it's also important, one of the reasons that I brought it up is, a lot of the time if you're fishing open water muskie fishing, or if you're, say you're trolling muskies or something, or even walleye. I mean, it's important to kind of know, out on Erie, there's that kind of suspended walleye bite on Lake Erie is pretty notorious for being phenomenal. The whole trolling stick baits and super deep water out there, you're only trolling stick baits down 10-20 feet. Well, that's because there's more oxygen up towards the surface. And in a really deep lake, if you're fishing in 60 feet of water, it's probably not the most beneficial. The fish might not be in 60 feet of water. They might be in 60 feet of water, but down 20 feet, I guess, is kind of the important part about mentioning this oxygenation and the water stratification is also to understand turnover, but also to understand you're probably wasting your time if you're drop shotting smallmouth in 60 feet of water. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about biological productivity classifications just briefly. And my goal isn't to bore you with productivity, but just to kind of be able to look at data sources like Lakefinder and determine an idea of what some possible characteristics will be like in terms of fish populations. So biological productivity, just a brief definition, is the generation of biomass from autotrophic organisms such as plants. So what the heck does this mean? What's an autotroph? This basically just means plant growth. Okay. So there are different classifications based on the amount of biological productivity, the amount of plant growth, the amount of which is relational to the amount of nutrients that are in the water. So I'm going to start off with high classification. So hypereutrophic, tons and tons and tons of biological productivity. This is generally because of runoff, fertilizers in highly agricultural areas, things of that nature. Once you get that nitrogen and that phosphorus in those systems, it can lead to the crazy blue-green algae blooms, and other plants really thrive on it as well. And this is kind of why you get some of those super weed choked areas. Like my experience with them is out in Morris, where I went to undergrad. There were a number of little pond lakes and sloughs in that area, in the Prairie Pothole region, where there's a ton of agricultural runoff in those areas. There's not a lot of bodies of water, so this fertilizer kind of accumulates and it really changes the ecosystems. So hypereutrophic is extremely rich in nutrients and minerals, high biological productivity. Generally speaking, you're going to see a lot of carp, panfish, bullheads, maybe some walleye, maybe some bass. But a lot of the time these lakes are pretty choked out, and there isn't really a sustainable environment or ecosystem for fish populations to thrive. However, some of the craziest carp that I've ever seen, populations that I've ever seen, have been in these lakes. So next we have eutrophic. So this is just down from hypereutrophic. This is rich in nutrients, and so it supports a dense plant population. Generally speaking, this is high biological productivity. Hypereutrophic is super high biological productivity. So same thing here. It's just lesser, a little bit healthier system overall, generally. So you have populations that are going to thrive are going to be bass, panfish, carp, bullheads, maybe walleye, but that's kind of depends on the system. And if it's a little bit deeper of a system, then it might support decent walleye populations. But the important part of eutrophic systems is, generally speaking, what's going to thrive the most are going to be bass and panfish. So we have our mesotrophic, that's kind of our intermediate nutrient levels, intermediate biological productivity, kind of middle ground here. Generally characterized by good walleye populations, perch populations, muskie, pike, maybe smallmouth. things of that nature. This is a lot of like Mille Lacs would be considered mesotrophic. And, that's kind of representative by the populations that are there, but also the biological productivity. So then we have oligotrophic, which is kind of goes back to our water stratification thing. So those, when we were talking about lake trout lakes, they would normally be categorized as oligotrophic lakes, which have low nutrient levels and low biological productivity. So you have your kind of like, typical Canadian Shield Lake or Great Lake or something that, are going to be deep and they're going to stratify, and, things like lake trout, pike, walleye, some of your more pelagic bait fish are going to be able to thrive in these ecosystems because there's, such a difference in what they are. So what does all that mean, right? Well, so the DNR on like Lakefinder will have a trophic state index, and the trophic state index, it might say TSI or something. What that tells you is what sort of population you might be able to expect of that ecosystem. So I think the scale goes 0 to 100, 100 being like very, very eutrophic or hyper-eutrophic, and 0 being very, very oligotrophic. Something in that middle ground, you're probably going to see, walleye, perch, smallies, muskie, pike. Up towards the tail, up towards the, the higher end, you're going to see, that bass, panfish, carp, bullheads, whatever. And, you're going to kind of see a spectrum of the populations that will thrive and how they will do. And of course, as you and I are both aware, there are outliers in fishing. Like fishing is probably one of the most, like, for every time that you make a hard, fast rule about fish and their behavior, they're probably going to try their best to break it.
Oh, just like dogs.
Yeah, for sure.
Just when you think you got it, down, they go ahead and fool you again. So no, I cracking a joke here, but yeah, with fishing, like it seems like once you figured it out, they always throw another little curveball at you, and that's what makes it honestly a lot of fun.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. I mean, I think that's what's fun about fishing is just that. Or one of the things that's fun about fishing is kind of seeing how they will break your rules.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of that trend where initially you might think you're a master fisherman, right? And then got a couple humbling days, and then oh man, I'm getting pretty good at it. And then man, they'll humble you. That's one thing about fish is they'll humble you for sure.
I think everything in life's that way a little bit, if looking at correctly.
For sure. Yeah. Okay, so we kind of have like a basic understanding of some of these. So we talked about a little bit about forage base.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about understanding like water characteristics, as well as like system characteristics with the water, the biological productivity classifications. So what does this do? What does this mean, right? So it's a way to kind of educate your algorithm so that you can kind of think about all of these factors in a given day. So it's kind of like placing your goal in the context of the ecological system and thinking broadly about the interactions of each of these. So like I said, substrate composition. So what's the bottom, what's going on there? Are, a lot of lakes in central Minnesota are just basically featureless bowls that have, very little beyond mud to relate to. But then a lot of lakes have mud flats and rock piles and reefs and sand and whatever, right? So kind of think about that. Also think about the forage base. Are they on a minnow diet or a crawfish diet? What does the spawning area look like? Where are they in relation to spawn, but also where is the spawning area? So like, say, Brian, you and I, we're going out walleye fishing. It's going to be, opening day, walleye fishing, right? Well, say they're spawning now, right? Opener's 3 weeks away. Yeah. About 3 weeks away. we're not going to want to fish the mud flats in 3 weeks from now. I mean, you could probably catch the fish on the mud flats 3 weeks from now, but that wouldn't be my first go. So I know that the walleyes spawn in this area, this area, this area in substrates of, gravel to sand transitions, or primarily gravelly transitions with kind of a mixed sporadic boulder rock, kind of basketball-sized boulder rock, and then also gravel. So I can kind of, go to my mental bank of all those days spent in my 14-footer idling around in my 6-horse, and I can kind of think, okay, well, this shoreline has that, this shoreline has that, this shoreline has that. And then I can begin to think about, okay, well, if I was a walleye, where would I go after spawning? I'd probably go to the first place where I can get a good meal consistently for a while, recuperate some of my energy, and then push off to do different walleye things. So knowing, some basic spawning areas, or even areas that you think they could spawn in, being able to look adjacent to those things, and then, find fish, or, at least get an idea of where they are or are not. For muskie, I think this is an important thing, is like, where do they spawn? Okay, so it's going to be like opener in Minnesota this year. I would say the average muskie in Minnesota is probably spawning now, or they're going to spawn before muskie opener for sure. I don't know what water temps are looking like, but I would say we're a few weeks ahead of, normally muskies are spawning around opener, or just spawned, or whatever, right? Like, I see a lot of muskies paired up on the lacs around opener. Well, this year that's probably going to be later, or probably going to be earlier, so opener is going to be a little bit later in relation to the whole spawning deal. But that's also important to know, because if they are going to be post-spawn, so thinking about, Mille Lacs, well, where do they spawn in the Mille Lacs? They're not spawning out in 35 feet of water. They're spawning in shallow water areas that are protected from big winds of any real direction. The more protected, the better. Without naming specific areas, that's as kind of specific as I can get. The bays, basically, right? So where do they go next, right? Again, same thing. Like, it's a pretty reasonable assumption that they're going to go to the next place where they can recuperate the energy lost during the spawn. So kind of those spawn adjacent areas. Okay, where are they going to go after that? They're going to push to, like on the lacs, I think that the vast majority of our fish live off of pelagic bait fish, so live off of our tulipy. And so I think they push out to open water after that kind of middle ground between spawn and summer. I think they spend some time in sort of adjacent areas. And so it's kind of opening up the perspective a little bit, applying this, sort of systems approach, systems perspective, kind of whatever, thinking big picture, goals to catch smallmouth, what are impacting the smallmouth, where are they in relation to the entire lake. This can be applied when you're going to a new lake, trying to learn it, trying to think about, like, what is the ecology of the lake? Are there, if my goal is bass fishing, like if I want to catch a bunch of largemouth, it doesn't make sense to go to an oligotrophic lake that is probably supporting trout and pelagic bait fish, you know what I mean? Or whatever, or salmon, or whatever it is, right? Thinking about the time of the year, pre-spawn, staging for spawn, post-spawn, kind of those things, and just kind of like using deductive reasoning to find, to kind of go from these broad ideas to specific conclusions. And then also using Lakefinder is I keep preaching Lakefinder. It's such a phenomenal resource. You can use it to determine, a general idea of what the population looks like, and, also an idea about the population characteristics as well. And we could ramble on about, I've got some other ideas that you and I, Brian, have talked about a little bit in terms of population dynamics and kind of those more broad characteristics. But this is kind of the quick and dirty, what is this guy talking about? Well, I'm talking about, thinking about your fish in terms of thinking about your goal. Let's say it's a 6-pound smallmouth. Let's think about that in relation to the whole entire lake and everything that works together, because there is, you know, there are factors beyond just that fish. There are factors that explain its behavior. And so, yeah, ecology is, you know, kind of dealing with the relationships of organisms in their environment and their surroundings, and just kind of taking into consideration the more broad lens of ecology in terms of applying that to your fishing. To catch that 6-pounder, that 7-pounder, or 30-inch walleye, or 50-inch muskie, or whatever it might be, or honestly, just catch a fish some days.
Yeah. Some days are like that, man. Just get the damn bait in the water.
Yeah, it's
just keep fishing. We're gonna grind it out. We'll get one.
Yeah, yeah. Just catch one fish. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Any questions for any of that? I mean,
well, I think you've done a multifaceted kind of laying of the groundwork. The specific examples, I think, you know, if people wanted to grab a homework assignment, go out to the water and, you know, kind of try to understand some of the more technical terms that you kind of have placed, and then start reading and start looking and figuring out and trying to develop those patterns that evolve because of the ecology.
And I should note that, like, I think I forgot to mention this earlier. I've talked to you about this before, Brian. Like, man, I keep notes with everything.
Yeah.
I mean, every day that I'm in the water, I jot something down. You know, ideally every day is as detailed as, you know, water temp and weather and fish caught and this and that, whatever. But sometimes it's like, man, I went out and I drove around and saw some fish, caught a couple, you know, whatever. But a lot of the days, like, I go out, I don't even fish very much. I just go out and drive around and scan. This is by myself, of course, not with clients. With clients, like, where, you know, all systems go, we're going to try and spend as much time fishing as fishing my most efficient water possible. But by myself, I spend a pretty significant time just going out and you know, finding things. So some of my notes are about you know, specific spots or areas that I found. Some are about days of fishing. Man, we really crushed them in 8 feet of water today on July 9th. We had a slew of storms come through all day and big wind, and for some reason the smallmouth were on fire. Okay, well, why were they on fire? You know, but also kind of being able to, like, go back to those notes annually and kind of see, okay, well, what did I catch them on a year ago? Okay, well, today didn't work, so what happened a year ago? And this kind of idea of, like, silly little notes. Like, I like the idea of, like, when my grandpa and when I was a kid, my grandpa would, like, have walleye whiffers, and, you know, he had a Lowrance and, you know, all the gadgetry. But and I remember spending a lot of days looking at a walleye whiffer with grandpa, or a general walleye whiffers, a lake map of Mille Lacs. It was put out by King Tut's tackle shop, and I want to say, like, late 90s. I still have one of grandpa's old whiffers with a handful of his waypoints on there and just little notes and things. You know, it'll say, like, gravel to mud transition or shelf or whatever, right? But I think there's no amount of information that can't be utilized in some way. And so I think that, you know, knowledge of the area and kind of utilizing some of these ideas of ecology to shorten the learning curve of your fishing, so that, you know, you can kind of look at a lake map and be a little bit more educated to, like I said, shorten the learning curve and improve and maximize efficiency on the water.
I'm glad you brought up the notes part, because I totally kind of spaced about that. But that is it's something that I every year try to continue to get a little bit better at. And it's always interesting to go back and go, why didn't this work? you know, and especially for fishing back when I was doing a little bit more guiding in the fishing stuff, like it worked for 2 years in a row and didn't work this year. What was wrong? You know, that kind of stuff is, I think, invaluable to your understanding as to what is driving the particular species you're trying to get.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
but then one also, like this year, we had Mille Lacs earliest ice off ever.
Yeah.
Ever recorded. We had Mille Lacs earliest ice off. I believe it was March 16th. If
was
I remember
it that
right.
Early?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was March 16th.
That's crazy.
You know, so the other thing with this is, like, I've got notes for about the last 10 or 12 years, 15. I mean, they kind of get kind of spotty when I was younger, but for the last 10 years, I have pretty solid detailed notes. Maybe not of every day, but of the vast majority of days that I spend on the water. A couple notebooks full of this stuff. And one of the cool things is this year, you know, I can go back and look at, obviously since this is the record early ice out, I don't have any notes for, you know, ice out on March 16th, but I might have some notes for ice out on early April and how that kind of impacted the rest of the season. And being able to go back and kind of look at those things is, you know, to plan things out. I mean, it really can give you a more holistic idea of like what's going on in the system. Like you said, like, you know, to, you know, better understand these things. But also, you also get to interpolate between specific years. So if you're not somebody like Brian or I that has the opportunity to spend a lot of time doing these things, you know, some of those little notes, you know, can be additive and cumulative over the years, so that, you know, there's always some, you know, level of something to touch back on. Like, man, my memory's pretty solid in a lot of ways, but sometimes remembering intricacies from previous seasons, you know, kind of doesn't work. So I think that's another valuable aspect of the notes idea.
I carry around one in my bird vest and mark down every bird contact I have. Little field notebook.
And see, like, the sort of researcher or scientist in me would love to, like, put those into like a statistical, you know, analysis and see, like, you know, you and I have talked hunting for hours and hours on end. But, you know, like, one of the things that always gets me, you know, like, I've talked to you on my pheasants and finding them where I do, and in small sloughs and edges of cattails and that. And, like, for me, my brain is statistically, you know, biased towards, you know, those areas. It would be interesting to look at what, you know, you and I's internal biases are for how we operate versus what, like, actual statistics, actual, like, statistical analysis, significance tests, things of that nature. It'd be interesting to see, like, you know, how accurate our assumptions actually are.
Yeah, sometimes I don't want to know, though. It's always that wild card event where it's like, gosh, you know, I thought I was a good hunter. And, like, you know,
yeah.
I get one of those days every fall where it's just like, oh, please, you know, it's going to strike. Like, don't be this one guy that comes up and hunts with me for one day. Like, please, you know, let it fall on somebody who's got 2 or 3 days planned that, you know, birds just don't want to cooperate or whatever. You know, it just embarrasses you and humbles you it embarrasses you a little bit as a guide and humbles you as for sure as a hunter and a fisherman.
Yeah, for sure.
I get, like I said, I get one day usually every season with a paying customer, and as I expand a few more, I'm sure that'll, you know, the numbers are what they are. You know, the more days you spend out with your quarry, you know, there's periods that are on fire and then there's periods that are not. And you just hope that, Yeah, like I said, it doesn't land on one day with a one. He's only there for a day. It never fails. Never
Yeah,
fails.
I'm kind of tying that back to like, my guide service and my expansion this year into the river scene, river aspect, river guiding. There are times when lakes just kind of turn off. Like, Mille Lacs can get tough in the kind of dog days of summer. And, there are a number of other lakes in the area that, that provide good fishing opportunities as well. But I think that kind of dog days of summer when it's kind of quieting down on the lakes, I think sometimes that's when the river seems to be the best. Seems to be those days when you put a topwater in front of any given smallmouth, they're probably going to bite it. And I think that's one of the things that I'm most excited for this season is the ability to kind of say, all right, well, Mille Lacs always has the giant opportunity. I don't really think there are many other bodies, maybe some of the Great Lakes fishing or some of connecting bodies of water to the Great Lakes that have, bigger smallmouth overall. But I don't think there are many opportunities that are better to catch big smallmouth than Mille Lacs Lake. I spent a lot of time on other bodies of water, and it just does not seem. I'm always impressed with the number of big smallmouth in Mille Lacs, but also just the prevalence. And this is important to note. Just kind of talking about Mille Lacs a little bit more here. Using some data from the Mille Lacs Area Fisheries Department, there is sort of a left-tail distribution of the smallmouth population in Mille Lacs. So what we see, this is a pretty natural distribution. So we kind of see that peak of fish, the highest prevalence of fish around 17 inches or so, right? So a left-tail distribution, kind of imagine, a tail at the left, and then kind of a gradual increase as we go right, and kind of that highest prevalence of fish is around that 17-inch mark. And then there's also the same data set will also tell you that there's a healthy number of 18, 19, and 20-inch smallmouth as well. So with a left-tail distribution, kind of centered around that 17-inch mark, like a 17-inch smallmouth is a pretty good fish. Like, in terms of lake fish, that fish is probably 3 pounds, 3.5 maybe. And then, as they push that 20, 21, 22, they're going to be close to that 5, 6, whatever. So, I think that's important to note is that there's, and this is, I was just saying the smaller population is unique. Well, this is, kind of quantitative evidence that supports that there's a high prevalence of fish around 17 inches and a healthy number of 18, 19, and 20-inch fish as well. One of the things that's kind of important to note about smallmouth is there has been pretty extensive analysis of smallmouth bass growth on Mille Lacs. So in the first year, they're going to grow about 7 inches. Year 2, they're going to be about 9.8 on average. 5 years is going to be 15 inches or so. And then they're going to kind of plateau from there. The growth is going to slow down, and instead of an inch or a couple per year, it's going to be, slower. I guess I don't know. It's going to be significantly slower. And then, from that 5-year mark to get from 15 inches at 5 years to 20 inches is probably going to be, they're probably going to be 11 or 12 years old at that 20-inch mark. So, it's kind of, it's good information to know, I think. This is also why my guide service is strictly catch and release on smallmouth. I don't know of a guide service that does not operate in strictly catch and release on smallmouth because they are pretty slow to mature, and our fishery is very healthy right now, and we want to keep it that way. But I brought this up because the smallmouth population is phenomenal in Mille Lacs. But when the bite gets tough, I want to be able to go and play around in my jet boat on the river a little bit. And topwater smallies on the river seem like one of the best times that you can have that's legal. You know what I mean?
Dude, you don't have to tell me. That is my favorite time of year when it comes to fishing. It doesn't matter if it's conventional or fly. It's topwater all day.
Oh man, there is this would be kind of cool. Like, man, up in Alaska, it doesn't happen all the time, but when we can get salmon on topwater, oh my god, man, it is so cool. One of the last days that I had this last year, man, I was crushing them on a little tiny smallmouth plopper. I mean, no different than what you or I are used to fishing around here. A standard. This was a double barrel cone head, kind of like a medium sized double barrel cone head with like a 1/0 B10S, maybe even a size 2 B10S, just a, pretty small hook overall.
Yeah.
But, man, just crushing silvers on little smallmouth poppers. But yeah, Alaska's cool. Smallmouth on the fly are cool. And, river fishing is super cool. But so is Mille Lacs too, so it's all cool, I guess.
I might have to name the episode title that "Fishing is all cool," man.
Fishing is all pretty cool. It's really, I really appreciated talking to you and having this conversation. It's my final week of classes. So most of my finals are essays and things that are due this week. I do have 2 essays that are due next week, but then I'm totally done with my first year of my master's program. Super fortunate. As of today, my lowest grade going into all my final assignments is 95.3%, which is cool. But all this being said, like, I'm in total school mode right now, and I haven't really started thinking about fishing. And so my little tangent about everything being cool is me thinking about fishing and getting absolutely ridiculously excited for this season. Like, I'm looking at fish pictures on my laptop as we talk. I'm like, man, that client caught a 481, on 3 days after opener. Hopefully we can replicate that, and I'm just thinking, like, behind every picture, there's kind of a story. And, I think that's one of the cool things too about fishing is that I get to look back on these memories of clients and, absolutely phenomenal experiences. Like, I don't know. So yeah, the culmination of all those cools was me remembering
geeking out
how much
it's almost
how
time
much
to
I love
fish.
fishing, how much I love fishing, because sometimes school hinders my fishing ability. It's dang old school.
Yeah, you're the pack 25 pounds of crap into a 5-pound sack kind of guy. So
Yeah.
I get it. And
School and running and operating a business full time. It's I would definitely describe that as 25 pounds of crap
in a 5-pound sack.
Yeah.
At any given point in the cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, that's how it was when I was taking my captain's license test too. Like, I was trying to study for, and do master's level work while also, studying for my captain's license test and everything. And, like, so glad that that's over. I recently recarpeted my main guide boat. It was my grandpa's boat before mine. Grandpa gave me a sweetheart of a deal a couple of years ago, and I want to upgrade, but boats are expensive, and as we discussed earlier, the sparklier they are does not necessarily mean that they catch fish any better. So I decided to recarpet my guide boat. Some of the carpet was starting to tear and that, so guide boat's gonna have fresh carpet in it now, kind of buttoning things up there, and it looks phenomenal for a 13-year-old boat. It sure shines up well with that new carpet. And then buying the new jet boat was stressful, and, like, kind of figuring out, like, I mean, it was super cool to buy the jet and figure everything out, but when you buy a boat and a motor, especially a jet motor, and then put them together, like there are certain intricacies with a jet boat that you don't necessarily know if it's going to work quite the way you want it to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of nerve-wracking and stressful, and but now we're on the tail end of all that. We're a couple weeks away from the start of the guide season. I've got a pretty solid schedule of my repeats, and I'm excited to add new clientele to that as well. But I'm very excited for the season. I'm very prepared, and this conversation has only further fueled my desire to get out and catch some fish.
Well, where can people find you, book a trip with you this summer?
Yeah, so my website is www.windyfishing.com. You can also find me at Windy Fishing Guide Service on Facebook or Instagram. Through my website, you can also find an online booking interface through GoGuide, which will take you to an online portal and allow you to see my schedule, see my availabilities, pricing, all of that stuff. On the website, you can click book a trip online. You can find more information, a gallery, kind of everything that you need on my website there. Or you can give me a call, 320-362-1727.
What was that again?
320-362-1727. Or email at Keenan, Keenan, at windyfishing.com. All of this is on my website as well. So if you make it there, you can find my contact information through the contact tab. But you can also reach out to me if you have any questions about anything that I said on the podcast. But I would be thrilled to add anybody to my calendar for trophy, smallmouth, muskie, or walleye fishing this season.
Right on, man. Well, we're going to definitely have you back. I know we got a couple other things we've been talking about doing as well. So, lastly, you got anything else to say? Otherwise,
I don't think so. I think we're good. I mean, I think
we laid it out. I think it went pretty well.
We did it. Yeah.
Well,
no crazy technical difficulties this time, or like crazy lags or anything.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, Keenan, again, I appreciate you coming on the show. We'll, like I said, we'll have to have you back soon.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Brian.
All right, ladies and gents, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Maze and Outdoors podcast. If you would, like, share, subscribe, tell a friend. Do your part. Help me promote the show. Really would appreciate it. I've got some dates open for October if you're looking to come up and rough grouse hunt and woodcock hunt with me. Not too many left, but I've got some dates right in the heart of the season, as well as early and late season dates available. Head on over to www.amazin.com and you can find out my calendar and book a hunt directly there. Appreciate everybody who hosted and judged up at the the Moose River Grouse dog trials this past weekend. It was fun to finally let Stella loose and see what she's got. And hopefully next fall, we'll maybe run a trial or two if we're not too busy guiding. God bless everybody. Enjoy the spring weather. Shoot straight for the turkey hunters. And I'm out of here.
There's a woodcock.